Pascal Lamy is, as a former EU Trade Commissioner, and was the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and he joins us now from Davos. Good evening to you. We'll come on to talk about the WTO possibilities in a moment. But first of all, in July last year, as far as the Brexit negotiations were concerned, you said it would be complex, bumpy and nasty. After Theresa May's speech yesterday, do you still hold that view?
Yes, I still hold that view. It's going to be complex, bumpy and nasty, like any trade negotiation. We know that by experience, unless we invent the first ever trade negotiation in history, which would be a love affair, I don't really believe it can happen.
Except that Theresa May is determined to invent something. She doesn't want, as we talked about a minute ago with Chris Cook, an off-the-shelf deal like Norway. She wants a bold and ambitious free trade agreement with the EU. How do you think that would work?
I think that's what we have to do now that UK has decided to leave the internal market. As you just said in your excellent summary, UK will be a third country like Mexico, like Korea, like Japan. So UK has to negotiate the terms of access to the EU market, and EU has to negotiate the terms of access to the UK market. It's 7 for the size of the EU market to 1, which is the size of the UK market. It's going to be complex, long. It's probably a good thing, a better thing than going back to the WTO tariffs, but it will take time, and inevitably trade will be less open than when the UK was a member of the internal market.
They may have to go back to the WTO, because obviously, what Christine Lagarde was essentially saying was that actually, if you're outside the club, you're not going to get as good a deal as if you were inside the club. No one wants to give Britain such a good deal as they have just now. And I wonder what you think of the idea, we've already heard about HSBC and UBS perhaps shifting to Paris and beyond, that actually certain different areas, for example, financial services and the car industry, might strike separate deals within the EU. What do you think of that?
No, I think there will be no separate deal.
Right.
It's a single undertaking. You have to agree on everything before you agree on anything. And there's no deal which will be a sectoral deal. And this will be toughly negotiated on both sides. As you just said in your program, the main difficulty for the British exporter to the EU continent, whether goods or services, like financial services, for instance, accounting, will be that the UK will have to match EU regulations and standards without having any say on this regulation and standards. That's a big problem for the future.
Now, on the question of how all this operates, because of course we have to, as it were, you trigger Article 50, you negotiate your way out, you separate the laws that exist between the EU and the UK, and then the idea would be that simultaneously you'll do your deal, your fresh deal at the same time. Is that possible, do you think?
No, I don't think it's doable simultaneously. It can start simultaneously, but any trade negotiation of this kind is very complex and will take a long time. So I'm absolutely convinced this is not doable in 2 years.
Two things about that then. It's not doable in 2 years, and yet David Davis, who's our chief negotiator, says he hopes it'll be done by the end of 2018. Two things. You don't think it'll be done by then. Do you think, knowing the complexity of all this, that the UK has a sufficiently high-octane negotiating team?
Very difficult to say. What I know is that, like any other EU member, UK disbanded its trade expertise when it was transferred to the European Union. So they have to reconstitute a whole body of trade experts and trade negotiators. This will inevitably take time, and by the way, be pretty costly, and at least that's what I'm told by my friends in the consulting and the legal business.
Right. So how long, in your estimation, do you think it would take to strike a new deal with the EU?
I don't know of any trade negotiation that lasted less than 5 to 7 years.
7
which
years.
means that there will need to be a sort of interim arrangement which will have to be negotiated before we move to the cruise regime, which will be the new trade regime.
So we have a situation where Theresa May is saying, I don't want a bad deal. It's no deal rather than a bad deal. And what if there is no deal, and as Chris Cook says, we then fall back in WTO rules? One thing, first of all, would this tariff of, for example, 10% on car imports to the EU apply to Britain automatically, first of all?
Yeah, that's a possibility if there's no deal. As you rightly say, you go back to WTO rules, but WTO rules are worse for UK and, by the way, for EU into the UK than a good deal. So this notion, I've been a trade negotiator. This notion that no deal rather than a bad deal is something all trade negotiators have been saying all the time. The question is, if you have an option between going back to the WTO rules, which is 10 of pain, or a deal which is 4 of pain, you will choose the 4 of pain.
Now, just finally, you're very well aware, and you indeed know Boris Johnson. Would you think he should be one of the kind of lead persons in negotiations, given what he said today that so offended so many French?
Look, what Boris Johnson said today leads me to wonder whether it's Donald Johnson or Boris Trump. It's a clear embarrassment for all these high-flying diplomats in the Foreign Office, and they deserve all our compassion.
Thank you very much indeed, Pascal Lamy.